The Starlit Opera House shimmered under the London fog of 1932, its crystal chandeliers casting ethereal glows upon velvet seats filled with society's elite. As the curtain rose on La Traviata, Madame Elena Voss, the prima donna, stepped into the spotlight, her voice soaring like a nightingale. Until it faltered. A gasp rippled through the audience as she clutched her throat, collapsing in a heap of silk and sequins. The orchestra halted. Screams pierced the air. In the wings, shadows stirred. Whispers of poison, jealousy, and hidden vendettas. Who among the glittering crowd had orchestrated this fatal finale? Hercule Poirot, seated in box 5, adjusted his mustache, his little gray cells already awakening. Chapter 1. The Curtain Falls. The Starlit Opera House, a beacon of elegance in the heart of London, stood resolute against the creeping fog of 1932. Its grand facade, adorned with gilded cherubs and marble columns, glowed faintly under the gaslights, drawing the city's elite like moths to a flame. Inside, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation, the air heavy with the scent of perfume and polished wood. Velvet curtains framed the stage, their crimson folds promising a night of transcendence through La Traviata. The chandeliers, dripping with crystal, cast prismatic light across the audience, their jewels and furs sparkling in response. Among them sat Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit and meticulously waxed mustache marking him as a man of precision, seated in box 5 with a view both of the stage and the sea of faces below. The orchestra swelled, strings weaving a delicate prelude, and Madame Elena Voss, the prima donna, stepped into the spotlight. Her presence commanded silence. Her sapphire gown shimmered as if woven from starlight. Her voice, a cascade of crystalline notes, soared through the aria. Each champagne flute lay toppled beside the body, its contents pooling on the polished boards. The method, perhaps, he mused, but the motive, that is the true aria. He adjusted his tie, his mind already dissecting the tableau before him. Inspector Japp arrived with his usual bluster, his burly frame pushing through the crowd. "Poirot, what brings you here? Another of your coincidences?" His tone was gruff, but a flicker of relief crossed his face at the sight of the detective. "Ah, mon ami," Poirot replied, his accent as crisp as his starched collar. "The opera calls to the soul, and it seems to the detective. Madame Voss was no mere singer. A diva, oui, but one with enemies as numerous as her admirers." His gaze drifted to the wings, where shadows stirred and faces paled under scrutiny. Backstage, the suspects gathered like players in a grim second act. Reginald Hawthorne, the understudy, stood with arms crossed, his lean frame taut with suppressed ambition. His dark eyes burned with resentment. Voss had overshadowed him for years, stealing roles he believed were his by right. "She was a tyrant," he muttered when questioned, his voice low but venomous. "But I was in the orchestra pit, chatting with the violinists. Ask them." Victor Langford, the theater manager, mopped his brow with a handkerchief, his florid cheeks betraying his nerves. Rumors swirled of his financial ruin, the opera house teetering on bankruptcy. "Everything's fine," he insisted, though his trembling hands suggested otherwise. Poirot noted Langford's proximity to the champagne flute before the performance. He had personally overseen its delivery to Voss. Sophia Beaumont, Voss's rival soprano, lingered near a costume rack, her beauty marred by tear-streaked cheeks. Her career had waned in Voss's shadow, her once lauded voice now relegated to secondary roles. "We were professional," she said, her voice brittle. "I was rehearsing across town. I couldn't have—" Her words trailed off, unconvincing despite her alibi. Whispered of a feud between Voss and Beaumont, a public spat at a gala months prior. Others spoke of Langford's debts, how Voss had refused to invest further in his failing theater. Hawthorne's bitterness was no secret. He had once hurled a script at Voss during rehearsal, earning a week's suspension. Carlyle, meanwhile, was an enigma. His wealth and influence shielded him from scrutiny, but his frequent visits to Voss's dressing room raised eyebrows. Poirot moved to the wings, where a crumpled note lay discarded near a prop table. He unfolded it carefully, reading the scrawled words, "Your final bow approaches." The handwriting was elegant but hurried, as if penned in haste. "A warning," Poirot said to Japp, "or a taunt." The note's presence suggested premeditation, but its ambiguity pointed to any of the suspects, or none. He questioned the stage manager, a wiry man named Jenkins, who swore the champagne had come from Langford's office. "A special vintage," he said, "for Madame Voss's nerves." Langford, when confronted, paled. "I ordered it, yes, but anyone could have tampered with it. The bottle was in my office all day." Poirot's gaze lingered on the suspects, each a thread in a tangled web. Hawthorne's alibi relied on the orchestra, but musicians were notoriously distracted during performances. Beaumont's rehearsal claim needed verification. Her tears seemed genuine, yet Poirot knew crocodile tears could mask guilt. Langford's financial motive was compelling, but his bluster suggested panic rather than cunning. Carlyle's detachment intrigued Poirot most. Men of his stature rarely acted without calculation. A red herring emerged. A vial of stage makeup found in Voss's dressing room tested positive for traces of cyanide. It pointed to Hawthorne, who oversaw props, but Poirot dismissed it. "Too convenient," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The true killer is subtler. They weave a tapestry of misdirection." The chapter drew to a close as Poirot strewn with lipsticks and pearl hairpins. The room, once a sanctuary for the prima donna's pre-performance rituals, now felt like a tomb, its opulence tainted by death. Poirot's patent leather shoes sank into the plush carpet as he surveyed the scene, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "A stage within a stage," he murmured, his French accent curling around the words like smoke. "Here, the truth hides behind the grease paint." Inspector Japp followed, his heavy footsteps a stark contrast to Poirot's deliberate grace. "Blasted mess, this," Japp muttered, wiping his brow. "Cyanide in the champagne, confirmed by the coroner. Quick and clean. Too clean, if you ask me. What's your take, Poirot?" Poirot adjusted his pince-nez, his gaze settling on a velvet chaise where a lace handkerchief lay crumpled. "The method, mon ami, is but the curtain raiser. The motive, That is the opera itself. He gestured to the suspects gathered just outside the door, their faces a gallery of grief, fear, and suspicion. Each has a role to play, but one is the composer of this crime. The first to face Poirot's scrutiny was Sophia Beaumont, Voss's rival soprano, whose tear-streaked face belied the fire in her emerald eyes. She stood by a rack of glittering gowns, her fingers twisting the handkerchief as if wringing out her own guilt. "Mademoiselle Beaumont," Poirot began, his voice soft yet piercing. "You and Madame Voss. There was no love lost, no? A rivalry that burned brighter than the footlights?" Sophia's lips trembled, but her chin lifted defiantly. "Rivalry? She destroyed me, Monsieur Poirot. Stole my roles, my patrons, even my admirers." Her voice cracked and she dabbed her eyes. "But murder? I'd rather have outsung her than seen her dead." She claimed an ironclad alibi, a rehearsal at the Lyceum Theatre across London, witnessed by a dozen chorus members, could harbor a grudge deep enough to kill. Victor Langford, the theater manager, hovered near the door, his florid face glistening with sweat despite the evening chill. His suit, once fine, was now threadbare at the cuffs, a silent testament to the opera house's financial woes. "Monsieur Langford," Poirot said, his voice deceptively genial. "The champagne flute. It came from your office, oui? A special vintage for Madame Voss?" Langford's hands shook as he mopped his brow. "Yes, I ordered it. Her favorite, to calm her nerves. But I didn't touch it after it left my desk. Anyone could have tampered with it." His eyes darted to the others, as if seeking an ally. Poirot's gaze lingered on Langford's trembling fingers, recalling whispers of the manager's debts. A diary entry found on Voss's vanity confirmed it. "Victor begs for more funds, threatens ruin if I refuse." The motive was clear. Voss's refusal to bankroll Langford's failing theater could have driven him to desperation. Lord Edmund Carlyle lingered in the corridor, his silver cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. His aristocratic features were impassive, but his eyes held a glint of calculation. Poirot approached, bowing slightly. "Monsieur le Lord, your generosity to Madame Voss was the talk of London. Diamonds, furs, yet such gifts often come with expectations, no?" Carlyle's smile was thin, his voice smooth as aged brandy. "She was my muse, Monsieur Poirot. A star deserves adornment, but I had no claim on her." His denial was too polished, and Poirot noted the cane. A potential hiding place for poison, perhaps. Carlyle's wealth and influence made him untouchable to most, but not to Poirot's relentless logic. As Japp questioned stagehands, Poirot sifted through Voss's belongings. A velvet-lined jewelry box held a sapphire ring, its settings suspiciously loose. Nearby, a vial of stage makeup caught his eye. It clasped behind his back. The champagne was delivered at 7:45 p.m., just before the curtain rose. Who had access? Jenkins, the stage manager, stammered that the bottle had sat in Langford's office all day, unguarded. A waiter, a nervous lad named Tommy, confirmed he'd carried the flute to Voss, but swore he hadn't touched the contents. "Mr. Langford handed it to me himself," Tommy said, his voice quavering. "Said it was for her nerves." Poirot's mind churned. The cyanide could have been introduced at any point, by Langford in his office, by a stagehand in transit, or even by Voss herself, though suicide seemed unlikely for a woman at the peak of her fame. The locket still clutched in her hand when found intrigued him most. He opened it carefully, revealing a faded photograph of a young girl, no older than 10, with Voss's striking features. A daughter? A sister? The initial E engraved on the locket offered no clarity, but Poirot sensed its significance. A secret, he whispered, kept close to the heart. The room grew colder as the night deepened, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. Poirot questioned the suspects further, probing their alibis. Beaumont's rehearsal at the Lyceum was plausible but needed confirmation. Her tears could be genuine or a performance worthy of the stage. Hawthorne's orchestra pit alibi hinged on distracted musicians, unreliable at best. Langford's insistence that the champagne was untouched rang hollow, given his access and motive. Carlyle, meanwhile, deflected questions with aristocratic ease, his cane tapping like a metronome of secrets. A stagehand mentioned a rumor. Voss had argued with Beaumont at a gala, accusing her of sabotaging a performance. Another whispered of Hawthorne's outburst during a rehearsal when he'd thrown a score at Voss, shouting, "You'll regret this." Langford's financial ruin was an open secret, and Carlyle's lavish gifts had sparked gossip of an affair, or blackmail. Each thread wove a tapestry of motives, but none yet formed a clear picture. Poirot paused by the vanity, his fingers brushing a diary page torn loose, its edges singed as if the fog beyond the stage door. His silhouette, swallowed by the night. "The plot thickens," Poirot said softly, his eyes gleaming with resolve. "And Hercule Poirot shall unravel it." Chapter 3. Whispers from the Past. The fog clung to London's streets like a conspirator, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant chime of Big Ben as Hercule Poirot made his way to Madame Helena Voss's Mayfair apartment. The starlit opera house with its glittering facade and shadowed secrets lay behind him, but the mystery of the prima donna's death followed like a persistent melody. The night air was sharp, cutting through Poirot's immaculate overcoat, yet his mind burned with the fire of deduction. The cyanide in the champagne, the cryptic note, the locket clutched in Voss's lifeless hand, each was a note in a discordant score, and Poirot was determined to resolve the harmony. The apartment, tucked in a quiet corner of Mayfair, was a shrine to faded glory. Velvet drapes framed tall windows, their deep burgundy faded at the edges. A grand piano stood in one corner, its keys yellowed, sheet music scattered like fallen leaves. Portraits of Voss in her prime adorned the walls, her sapphire eyes gleaming in roles as Carmen, Tosca, and Violetta. Poirot paused before one, noting the defiant tilt of her chin. "A woman of passion," he murmured, "and secrets." The scent of her perfume lingered, a ghostly echo of her presence, mingling with the musty air of a life interrupted. Inspector Japp, ever the pragmatist, arrived shortly after, his boots leaving damp prints on the parquet floor. "Autopsy's in, Poirot," he announced, flipping open his notebook. "Cyanide, no question, mixed in the champagne. She was dead within minutes. The flute was delivered just before her entrance, 7:45 p.m., from Langford's office. Seems our killer knew her routine cold." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching thoughtfully. "The timing, mon ami, is precise. Untouchable." Jap snorted. Sounds like motive enough to me. But Carlyle's not the only one. That understudy, Hawthorne, had a chip on his shoulder the size of Covent Garden. And Langford. Word is he's been cooking the books. Voss was his cash cow, and she was pulling out. Poirot nodded, filing away the information. He opened a drawer, revealing a leather-bound diary, its pages filled with Voss's looping script. An entry from 2 weeks ago caught his eye. Victor threatens ruin if I don't invest more. He grows desperate, dangerous perhaps. Another, more cryptic, read, S knows my secret. I cannot bear the shame. Poirot's brow furrowed. S. Sophia Beaumont, perhaps? Or another player in this drama? He turned to Jap. The locket, Inspector. Have you examined it further? Jap produced the gold locket, its engraved E glinting under the lamplight. Inside was the photograph of a young girl, her resemblance to Voss uncanny. A daughter, maybe, Jap ventured, or a sister. Could be a motive, family secrets run deep. Poirot's mind whirred. We must trace this child. She is a key, I think. He recalled Sophia Beaumont's tearful denial in the dressing room, her claim of being at a rehearsal across town. Mademoiselle Beaumont spoke of Voss's ruthlessness. Perhaps she knew more than she admitted. Leaving the apartment, Poirot and Jap returned to the opera house to question the waiter, Tommy, who had delivered the fatal champagne. The boy, barely 20, stood nervously backstage, twisting his cap in his hands. I swear, sir, he stammered, I just took the flute from Mr. Langford's office to Madame Voss. Didn't touch the drink itself. Poirot's gaze was piercing. And who was in the office, mon petit? Anyone unusual? Tommy hesitated. Well, I saw Miss Beaumont there earlier, talking with Mr. Langford. Looked like an argument. And Lord Carlyle? He was in and out all day, delivering flowers. Poirot exchanged a glance with Jap. An argument, you say, for such a calculated crime. Poirot revisited Sophia Beaumont, finding her in the rehearsal room, her voice echoing through scales with a brittle edge. Mademoiselle, he said, stepping into the dim light. You knew of Madame Voss's secret. A child, perhaps? A sister? Sophia's fingers froze on the piano keys. A child? She whispered, her face paling. She told me once, in confidence, a daughter, given up years ago to protect her career. I pitied her, Monsieur Poirot, but I didn't kill her. Her eyes darted away, and Poirot sensed a half-truth. Pity, he said softly, can mask envy. The opera house itself seemed to whisper clues. Poirot wandered its labyrinthine corridors, the air heavy with dust and memories. He paused by a stage door, noticing scuff marks in the grime, recent, as if someone had fled in haste. A shadow moves in the wings, he murmured, his mind conjuring Carlyle's retreating silhouette from the previous night. A new piece of evidence surfaced. A stagehand reported seeing Beaumont arguing with Voss hours before the performance, their voices raised in the green room. She slapped me, Sophia later admitted, her cheeks flushing. She called me a has-been, said I'd never sing again. But I didn't poison her. Her passion was convincing, but Poirot knew passion could fuel murder as easily as tears. As night fell, the opera house grew eerie, its chandeliers casting long shadows that danced like specters. Poirot stood alone on the stage, the empty auditorium stretching before him like a silent jury. He held the locket, its photograph a haunting reminder of Voss's hidden life. A secret worth killing for? He wondered aloud. The creak of a floorboard startled him, and he turned, catching the faint echo of footsteps in the upper galleries. Someone watching, or merely the building settling? The opera house guards its truths, Poirot said, his voice low. But Hercule Poirot shall not be deterred. Gray cells weaving through the threads of Madame Elena Voss's murder. The cyanide-laced champagne, the cryptic note, the locket with its haunting photograph, and the forged will, all pointed to a killer who moved with the precision of a maestro. Yet the motive remained as elusive as a shadow in the wings. Carlyle's estate, a Gothic relic on the outskirts of the city, loomed like a stage set for a tragedy. Its spires pierced the fog, and ivy clung to its stone walls like a mourner's veil. Poirot stepped from the cab, his patent leather shoes crunching on the gravel drive. The butler, a gaunt figure with eyes like polished obsidian, ushered him into a drawing room where a fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across mahogany paneling. Lord Carlyle stood by a decanter, his silver cane propped against an armchair, his aristocratic features etched with a studied calm. "Monsieur le Lord," Poirot began, bowing slightly, his voice as smooth as the brandy Carlyle poured. "Your devotion to Madame Voss was the talk of London. Diamonds, furs, a private box at the Starlit. Such generosity is rarely without expectation, no?" Carlyle's smile was thin, his eyes cold as the fog outside. "She was my muse, Monsieur Poirot. A star deserves adornment, as I told you. But I had no claim on her heart, or her life." He sipped his brandy, the firelight glinting off the glass. "You suspect me, I presume?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint sign of his amusement. "Suspect, monsieur? I observe. Your letters to Madame Voss, they spoke of love but also of possession. You urged her to abandon the stage, to be yours alone. A refusal, perhaps, could wound a man of your pride?" Carlyle's grip tightened on his glass, but his voice remained steady. "Empty words, monsieur. I adored her, yes, but I am no fool. She was a flame, untouchable. I accepted that." His gaze flickered to the cane, and piling up, Voss refusing to pay. Sounds like motive to me. Poirot nodded, but his thoughts drifted to Sophia Beaumont. A stagehand had reported seeing her arguing with Voss hours before the performance, their voices raised in the costume loft. Poirot found her in the rehearsal room, her fingers tracing the keys of a piano, her voice soft but strained as she hummed an aria. "Mademoiselle Beaumont," he said, stepping into the dim light. "You quarreled with Madame Voss on the day of her death. A heated exchange, I am told. What was its cause?" Sophia's hands froze, her eyes darting to meet his. She insulted me," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Called me a shadow of her talent. Said I'd never sing again. I slapped her, Monsieur Poirot, but I didn't kill her." Her tears were convincing, but Poirot knew tears could mask guilt as easily as grief. "I was in the loft, yes, but only to fetch a costume. I left her alive." Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was relentless. "And the champagne flute, mademoiselle? You were seen in Langford's office earlier that day. An opportunity, perhaps?" Sophia's face paled. I was there to discuss my contract, nothing more. Victor was desperate, begging me to stay on despite everything. Her voice broke, and Poirot noted the hesitation. A secret withheld, perhaps. New evidence emerged. A stagehand found a hidden passage behind the stage, a narrow corridor leading to a forgotten prop room. Poirot explored it, his torch cutting through the dust-choked air. The room was a graveyard of discarded sets, broken chandeliers, faded backdrops, and a trunk filled with old costumes. Among them he found a single glove, its silk stained with a faint trace of cyanide. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "A careless mistake. Or another misdirection." The glove was too small for Langford or Hawthorne, but it could belong to Beaumont, or even a stagehand playing a deeper role. Back in the auditorium, Poirot questioned Reginald Hawthorne ominously. Yet Carlyle's alibi was airtight. He'd been in his box, visible to dozens during Voss's fatal aria. Poirot dismissed the sighting as another distraction, his mind returning to the locket and its photograph. The girl with Voss's features was a puzzle piece yet to fit. Was she a daughter, hidden to protect Voss's reputation, or a sister tied to a past scandal? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a discovery, a jeweler's receipt tucked in a stagehand's ledger for a sapphire ring matching the one found in Voss's dressing room. The buyer? Victor Langford. A gift for Madame Voss, Langford admitted when confronted, to persuade her to invest. But I didn't poison it. The ring's loose setting intrigued Poirot. Could cyanide have been concealed within? Yet the evidence pointed too neatly to Langford, another thread in the tapestry of misdirection. As the night deepened, the opera house grew colder, its shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for the truth. Poirot stood in the prop room, the glove in his hand, his mind racing. The passage suggested a killer familiar with the theater's secrets, someone who moved unseen. Carlyle's cane, Beaumont's argument, Langford's fingerprints, Hawthorne's grudge. Each was a note in a complex score, but the melody remained incomplete. The chapter closed with a sudden sound, a soft thud from the stage above, followed by the faint rustle of fabric. Poirot's torch flickered, casting wild shadows as he climbed the passage stairs. Emerging into the wings, he glimpsed a figure fleeing, a dark silhouette vanishing into the labyrinth of the opera house. "The phantom moves," Poirot whispered, his heart quickening. But Hercule Poirot is never far behind. The fog outside pressed closer, as if conspiring to hide the killer's trail, but Poirot's resolve was unshakable. The truth he knew waited just beyond the next act. Chapter 5. Tangled Alliances. The Starlit Opera House, its grandeur dimmed by the specter of murder, seemed to pulse with secrets as Hercule Poirot gathered the suspects in the green room. The space, usually alive with the chatter of performers, was now a stage for interrogation, its emerald walls and velvet curtains absorbing the tension like a held breath. The fog outside pressed against the tall windows, casting a ghostly pallor over the scene, while the chandelier above swayed slightly, its crystals tinkling like a faint warning. Poirot stood at the center, his small frame commanding the room, his mustache a precise arc of determination. "Mes amis," he began, his voice soft yet resonant. "Alliances form in the dark, hidden behind the footlights. But the truth, it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot." Inspector Japp leaned against a table, arms crossed, his face etched with impatience. "Get on with it, Poirot," he grumbled. "We've got a killer to catch, and that cyanide vial in the dressing room points straight to Hawthorne. Case closed, I'd say." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his head tilting slightly. "No, no, Inspector. The vial. It is a red herring, planted to mislead. The true killer weaves a subtler web." He turned to the suspects, their faces a gallery of unease. Reginald Hawthorne, his lean frame tense with defiance. Victor Langford, mopping his brow with a sodden handkerchief. Sophia Beaumont, her beauty strained by fear. And Lord Edmund Carlyle, his silver cane gleaming like a silent accomplice. Poirot began with Hawthorne, whose dark eyes burned with resentment. "Monsieur Hawthorne," he said, stepping closer. "You and Mademoiselle Beaumont. There was a connection, no? A shared ambition, perhaps, to see Madame Voss removed from the spotlight." Hawthorne's jaw tightened, but Sophia spoke first, her voice sharp. "It was nothing like that. Yes, we were close, briefly. We wanted to challenge Elena, to take back what she stole. Our roles turned to calculation." Sophia Beaumont, her composure fraying, met Poirot's gaze. "Monsieur Poirot, you mentioned a child. Elena's secret. I knew of it. A daughter, given up to protect her career. She confided in me once, in a moment of weakness. I pitied her, but I didn't hate her enough to kill." Her words carried a tremor, and Poirot sensed a half-truth, her envy of Voss's success a smoldering ember. Carlyle, silent until now, tapped his cane lightly against the floor. "This is tiresome, Monsieur Poirot. You chase shadows while the true killer laughs. I loved Elena, yes, but I would not harm her." His aristocratic coolness was unshaken, yet Poirot noted the cane's rhythmic tapping. A nervous tell, perhaps? A new clue emerged. Bank records, discovered in Voss's apartment, showed regular payments to an account linked to Carlyle. "Blackmail, monsieur?" Poirot asked, holding up the ledger. Carlyle's eyes narrowed. "Charity, nothing more. She asked for help with private matters. I obliged." His vagueness only deepened Poirot's suspicion. The green room grew stifling, the suspect's alibis and motives intertwining like a Gordian knot. Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind sifting through the evidence. The cyanide in the champagne, the locket with the photograph, the forged will pointing to Hawthorne, the hidden passage, the stained glove. Each was a thread, but the pattern remained elusive. "The killer," he said, pausing for effect, "knew Madame Voss intimately, her habits, her secrets. They struck at her moment of triumph, a calculated act of betrayal." Jap, growing restless, pointed to the makeup vial. "What about this, then? Cyanide found in Voss's dressing room, and Hawthorne's the props man. Open and shut." Poirot shook his head, his voice firm. "Non, Inspector. The vial is a distraction, planted to incriminate Monsieur Hawthorne. The true poison was in the champagne, administered with precision. The vial, it is too crude." Poison. Beaumont's envy burned bright, her knowledge of Voss's secrets a dangerous weapon. Carlyle's wealth and influence made him a master of manipulation, his cane a potential tool of death. A new piece of evidence surfaced. A stagehand recalled seeing a shadow in the hidden passage before the performance, moving toward the prop room. "It was quick," the hand said, "like they knew the way." Poirot's thoughts returned to the glove, its cyanide stain a tantalizing clue. Was it Beaumont's, left in haste, or another misdirection? He questioned Sophia further, probing her argument with Voss. You slapped her, mademoiselle, for her insults. But was there more? A secret you feared she would expose? Sophia's eyes widened, her voice trembling. She knew things about me, yes. My past, my mistakes. But I didn't kill her. Her passion was convincing, but Poirot knew passion could mask guilt. Langford, meanwhile, crumbled under pressure. All right, I forged the will, he blurted, his face red. I thought if Hawthorne was blamed it'd save the theater, but I didn't poison her, I swear. His confession cleared one red herring but deepened the mystery. Who had planted the cyanide vial? Poirot's mind turned to the locket, its photograph of a young girl haunting him. He approached Carlyle, his voice low. The child, monsieur. Was she yours? A secret Madame Voss kept, perhaps under your influence. Carlyle's face hardened, his cane tapping faster. You overstep, Poirot. I know nothing of a child. His denial was too swift, too sharp. The green room seemed to close in, the air thick with suspicion. Poirot paused, letting the silence build, a dramatic effect for his audience of suspects. The killer, he said at last, is among us. Their heart a tangle of ambition, and betrayal. But the little gray cells, they see through the shadows. He stepped toward the door, his eyes catching a flicker of movement outside. Anticipation. The faint echo of arias lingering, as if the opera house itself mourned its lost star. Poirot's patent leather shoes clicked against the polished stage, his eyes gleaming with purpose. Mes amis, he announced to the gathered suspects, his voice a velvet blade. Tonight, we reenact the final moments of Madame Voss. And the truth, it shall take center stage. Inspector Japp, stationed by the wings, muttered skeptically. A rehearsal, Poirot? You think the killer's going to confess just because we play pretend? His burly frame shifted, his notebook clutched like a shield against Poirot's theatrics. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. Not confess, mon ami, but betray. The guilty heart cannot resist the spotlight. He gestured to the suspects, summoned under the guise of assisting the investigation. Reginald Hawthorne, his lean form taut with unease. Victor Langford, sweating despite the chill. Sophia Beaumont, her beauty shadowed by fear. And Lord Edmund Carlyle, his silver cane a silent companion. Each stood on the stage, their faces illuminated by a single spotlight, as if awaiting their cue in a grim opera. The rehearsal began with a stagehand playing Voss, stepping into the spotlight to mime the fatal aria. The orchestra pit, manned by a skeleton crew of musicians, struck up a haunting rendition of La Traviata's prelude, the notes weaving through the empty hall like ghosts. Poirot watched closely, his little gray cells attuned to every glance, every tremor. Mademoiselle Beaumont, he called, you were in the wings that night, no? Show us where you stood. Sophia, her hands trembling, moved to the left wing, her eyes darting to the spot where Voss had collapsed. I was here, she said, her voice brittle. I watched her sing, then left for my dressing room. Her alibi, the Lyceum rehearsal, had been partially confirmed, but a gap in her timeline between 7 and 7:45 p.m. rhythmically. You waste our time chasing phantoms. Yet Poirot's eyes caught the cane's gleam, a potential hiding place for poison, still unproven. As the rehearsal unfolded, Poirot directed the players with precision, recreating the moments before Voss's death. The stagehand mimed sipping the champagne, then staggered, collapsing as Voss had done. The suspects flinched, their reactions a study in guilt and innocence. Poirot's voice cut through the silence. The champagne was poisoned. But how? The flute was clean when it left Monsieur Langford's office. Or so we are told. A new clue emerged. A jeweler's receipt, found in Hawthorne's coat pocket during a search, for a sapphire ring matching the one in Voss's dressing room. Monsieur Hawthorne, Poirot said, holding up the receipt. You purchased a ring, no? A gift for Madame Voss. Or a vessel for poison. Hawthorne's face paled. It was a prop for the next production. I didn't give it to her. His denial was fierce, but Poirot sensed a lie. The ring's setting, loose and hollow, could have concealed cyanide, activated by the champagne's acidity. Poirot's thoughts turned to the locket, its photograph of a young girl haunting him. He approached Sophia, his voice low. Mademoiselle, you knew of Madame Voss's child, a daughter, given up for her career. But there is more, no? A secret tied to Lord Carlisle, perhaps. Sophia's breath caught, her eyes wide. The child was Edmund's, she whispered, her voice breaking. Elena told me in confidence. She hid her to protect his reputation and hers. I swore not to tell. Her admission shifted the narrative, implicating Carlisle in a scandal that could ruin him. Carlisle's cane stopped tapping, his face a mask of stone. That is a lie, he said coldly. I know nothing of a child. But Poirot noted the tension in his jaw, resonating. Knew Madame Voss's every move, her trust in her champagne, her habit of adjusting her ring before singing. They struck with precision, hiding in plain sight. A sudden sound shattered the tension. Gunshots, sharp and echoing, rang out from the wings. The suspects froze, their faces pale under the spotlight. Japp drew his revolver, shouting, "Stay where you are!" Poirot, unfazed, moved swiftly toward the sound, his torch cutting through the darkness. The shots were loud but oddly hollow, a stage prop perhaps, fired to disrupt the rehearsal. The auditorium plunged into chaos, stagehands scrambling, suspects shouting. Poirot reached the wings, finding a discarded prop pistol, its barrel warm but empty of real bullets. A distraction, he said, his eyes narrowing. The killer seeks to scatter us like leaves. He scanned the shadows, catching a glimpse of a figure fleeing down the hidden passage, a dark silhouette, swift and silent. Back on stage, the suspects were in disarray. Sophia clutched her shawl, her eyes wide with fear. Hawthorne's hands were clenched, his defiance shaken. Langford mopped his brow, muttering about curses. Carlisle alone remained calm, his cane tapping once more as if mocking Poirot's pursuit. The chapter closed with Poirot standing at the passage's entrance, his torch illuminating the dust-choked corridor. The gunshots, a desperate ploy, had failed to derail him. The killer grows bold, he whispered, his voice a low promise. But Hercule Poirot is bolder still. The fog outside swirled as if shielding the phantom's escape. But Poirot's resolve was a beacon, guiding him toward the next act in this deadly opera. Chapter 7. Pursued in the Fog. The Starlit Opera House, its grandeur now a hollow echo, seemed to shudder as the echo of prop gunshots faded into the night. The fog outside thickened, a dense curtain that swallowed London's gaslights and muffled the distant clatter of hooves. Hercule Poirot stood in the wings, his torch casting a narrow beam into the hidden passage where the shadowy figure had fled. The air was heavy with dust and secrets. The shots were meant to scatter us, but instead, they draw me closer. He stepped into the passage, his patent leather shoes echoing against the stone. The corridor twisted downward, a relic of the opera house's Victorian origins, leading to forgotten storage rooms and trapdoors. The fleeing figure had vanished, but Poirot's mind traced their path, a predator stalking prey. Emerging into the foggy street, Poirot caught a fleeting glimpse of the silhouette, a dark cloak billowing as it rounded a corner toward the Thames. He gave chase, his cane tapping rhythmically, his breath steady despite the damp chill. The fog was a living thing, curling around lamp posts and obscuring alleys, but Poirot's focus was unyielding. The figure darted through Covent Garden's cobbled lanes, their footsteps muffled but distinct. A sudden splash, a misstep into a puddle, gave Poirot a direction, but the fog closed in, and the shadow melted into the night. Returning to the opera house, breathless but undeterred, Poirot found Japp rallying the suspects in the auditorium. "Nobody leaves," Japp barked, his face red. "Those shots were a stunt, but someone's guilty of more than bad acting." The suspects, Reginald Hawthorne, Victor Langford, Sophia Beaumont, and Lord Edmund Carlyle, stood in a tense semicircle, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. Poirot's gaze settled on Carlyle, whose silver cane gleamed under the stage lights. "Monsieur le Lord," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "Your cane. It is a curious accessory, non? Hollow, perhaps, to conceal a vial of poison." He stepped closer, his eyes locking onto Carlyle's. The Lord's smile was cold, his aristocratic poise unshaken. "Prove it, Monsieur Poirot. My cane is a gentleman's affectation, nothing more." But Poirot noted the slight tightening of Carlyle's grip, a telltale sign of unease. The cane remained a tantalizing clue, untested but potent. Japp produced a new piece of evidence: water samples from the champagne flute, analyzed by the coroner's office. "Trace shawl." "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling. "You spoke of Elena's child, Edmund's child. I told you the truth. She confided in me. I kept her secret, even when she humiliated me." Her eyes darted to Carlyle, a flash of accusation in them. Poirot's mind returned to the jeweler's receipt for the sapphire ring found in Hawthorne's pocket. "Monsieur Hawthorne," he said, holding up the receipt, "you claimed the ring was a prop, yet its setting could hold cyanide activated by champagne. A clever method, no?" Hawthorne's defiance wavered, his hands clenching. "I bought it for the next show, I swear. I didn't give it to her." His denial echoed Langford's, but Poirot sensed a deeper truth. Hawthorne's ambition burned bright, but was it murderous? A red herring dissolved. The cyanide-laced makeup vial, once pointing to Hawthorne, was confirmed as harmless dye, planted to mislead. "Another distraction," Poirot said, his voice low. The killer is subtle, weaving misdirection like arias in a score. The auditorium grew colder, the fog pressing against the windows like a conspirator's breath. Poirot paced, his cane tapping in rhythm with his thoughts. The Locketts' photograph haunted him. A girl, perhaps Voss's daughter or sister, tied to Carlyle's scandal. The bank records showed payments to Carlyle, suggesting blackmail, but his denial was firm. Sophia's knowledge of the child implicated her, yet her tears seemed genuine. Langford's embezzlement and forged will pointed to desperation, not murder. Hawthorne's grudge was fierce, but his methods seemed bold, not stealthy. A new clue surfaced, a burned letter a burned letter fragment found in a Backstage ashcan by a constable. Japp handed it to Poirot, who read the faint words, "Elena, forgive me, S." The handwriting matched the earlier note, "Your final bow approaches," but was altered as if disguised. "S," Poirot murmured. "Sophia?" "Oui, but not the whole story. The killer moves in the shadows, using the opera house's secrets, the passage, the props, the fog itself." He recalled the fleeing figure, their cloak a fleeting glimpse of guilt. Was it Carlyle, his cane a tool of deception? Or Sophia, her envy a poison as deadly as cyanide? The chapter closed with Poirot standing at the stage's edge, the burned letter fragment in his hand. The fog outside swirled, as if shielding the killer's trail, but Poirot's resolve was unshakable. "The phantom flees," he whispered, his eyes gleaming, "but Hercule Poirot pursues." The auditorium fell silent, save for the faint creak of the chandelier, as if the opera house itself whispered of the truth just beyond the next act. Chapter 8. Revelations Under the Stars. The Starlit Opera House, its opulent facade cloaked in the dense fog of 1932 London, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot led the suspects to the glass-domed roof, a vantage point where the city's lights flickered like distant stars. The air was sharp with cold, the fog curling around the dome's iron framework, casting ghostly reflections on the panes. Poirot, his overcoat buttoned tightly, stood at the center, his small frame commanding the night. The chandelier below, visible through the glass, swayed faintly, its crystals tinkling like a distant melody. "Mes amis," he declared, his voice resonant with purpose. "Under the stars, truths are revealed, and the killer's mask shall fall." Inspector Japp, his breath visible in the chilly air, shifted uncomfortably. "This is dramatic, even for you, Poirot," he muttered, his notebook clutched tightly. "You think dragging us up here will make someone confess? That burned letter, S for Sophia, I'd wager, points straight to her." Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes gleaming under the starlight. "Patience, mon ami. The letter is a thread, oui, but the tapestry is complex. The killer betrays themselves not in words, but in silence." He turned to the suspects, their faces pale under the dim glow. "Abandoning her. But she loved her. I envied her success, but I admired her sacrifice." Her eyes filled with tears, and Poirot noted the sincerity. Yet his gray cells questioned whether envy had turned to malice. He turned to Langford, whose confession of embezzlement still lingered. "Monsieur Langford," Poirot said, his gaze steady. "You forged a will to frame Monsieur Hawthorne, hoping to save your theater. But Madame Voss's discovery of your crimes, it threatened ruin, no?" Langford's shoulders slumped, his voice hoarse. "I admit it. I fudged the books and she found out. She was going to expose me, ruin me. But I didn't poison her, I swear. His desperation was palpable, but Poirot sensed no guile in his panic. Langford was a man drowning in his own mistakes, not a mastermind. Hawthorne, his dark eyes flashing, stepped forward. "You're wasting time, Poirot," he snapped. "That ring you found, the jeweler's receipt, was for a prop, not a murder weapon. I wanted to outshine Voss, not kill her." His defiance was fierce, but Poirot noted a tremor in his hands, a sign of fear beneath the bravado. Carlyle, standing apart, tapped his cane lightly against the iron railing. "This is tiresome, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his aristocratic tone icy. "You chase shadows while the truth eludes you. I loved Elena, but I did not harm her." His composure was unshaken, yet Poirot recalled the bank records, payments from Voss to Carlyle, suggesting blackmail. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "your cane, it could conceal a vial, no? And the water in the champagne, traced to your estate's well. A curious coincidence." Carlyle's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent, his cane tapping faster. Poirot filed the reaction away, his mind turning to the burned letter fragment. "Elena, forgive me. S." The handwriting, altered to disguise its author, matched the earlier note. "Your final bow approaches." "A signature," Poirot murmured. "Like her, it broke my heart. Elena sent money through me, to keep it secret. I never told anyone, not even Edmund." Her confession implicated Carlyle further, tying him to the scandal. Poirot turned to Carlyle, his gaze piercing. "Monsieur, you denied knowledge of a child, yet Madame Voss paid you, blackmail perhaps, to keep her sister's existence hidden?" Carlyle's face hardened, his cane tapping ceasing. "You overstep, Poirot. Those payments were for charitable causes, nothing more." His denial was too swift, too polished. Langford, sensing the spotlight shift, blurted, "The will was my doing, yes, but the cyanide vial? Someone planted it to frame Hawthorne. I'm not the only one with secrets." His outburst confirmed the vial as a red herring. But Poirot's mind was elsewhere. The glove found in the passage was too small for Langford or Hawthorne, pointing to Sophia or an unseen accomplice. The rooftop grew colder, the fog pressing closer, as if conspiring to hide the truth. Poirot's thoughts turned to the ring, its loose setting a potential vessel for cyanide. The poison, he mused aloud, was not in the flute alone, but perhaps in the ring, activated by the champagne's touch. A method most ingenious and personal. A sudden scream pierced the night, echoing from the auditorium below. The suspects froze, their faces pale under the starlight. Japp drew his revolver, shouting, "Stay here!" as he rushed toward the stairs. Poirot, unfazed, raised a hand. "Calm yourselves, mes amis. This scream, it is no accident." His eyes gleamed, suspecting another ruse to disrupt his deductions. The scream, as it turned out, came from a stagehand who had tripped over a prop in the dark, her cry amplified by the auditorium's acoustics. But the interruption served its purpose. Tension among the suspects peaked, their nerves frayed. Poirot seized the moment, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The killer grows desperate," he said. "Their threats and distractions betray their fear." But Hercule Poirot sees Chapter 9, the final act. The Starlit Opera House, its gilded halls now steeped in the weight of impending revelation, stood as a silent witness to the unraveling of Madame Elena Voss's murder. The fog outside clung to the windows, a spectral curtain that seemed to guard the secrets within. Hercule Poirot, his small frame a beacon of resolve, had orchestrated a final gathering on the grand stage, the velvet curtains drawn back to reveal the empty auditorium, its seats a mute jury. The chandelier above cast a soft glow, its crystals tinkling faintly, as if anticipating the climax of this deadly opera. "Mes amis," Poirot declared, his voice resonant with quiet authority. "The final act is upon us, and the killer shall take their bow." Inspector Japp, his patience fraying, stood by the wings, his revolver at the ready. "Enough theatrics, Poirot," he grumbled, his notebook dog-eared from constant use. "That scream on the roof was a stunt, and I'm betting Sophia's our S from the letter. Let's wrap this up." Poirot's mustache twitched, his eyes gleaming with certainty. "No, Inspector. The scream was a ruse, oui. But it was my ruse, a trap to flush the guilty from their shadows." He turned to the suspects, their faces etched with tension. Reginald Hawthorne, his lean frame rigid with defiance. Victor Langford, his florid face slick with sweat. Sophia Beaumont, her beauty strained by fear. And Lord Edmund Carlyle, his silver cane a silent sentinel. The stage was set, and Poirot's little gray cells were poised to unveil the truth. He began with a dramatic pause, letting the silence build. "The murder of Madame Voss," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness, "was a crime of precision, woven with misdirection. The cyanide in her champagne, the locket with her sister's photograph, the forged will, the stained glove, the hidden passage, the jeweler's receipt, the burned letter." Opera House. His panic was genuine, but Poirot noted his access to the champagne flute, a damning thread. Hawthorne, his dark eyes flashing, stepped forward. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot," he snapped. "That ring receipt was for a prop, not a murder weapon. I wanted Voss's role, not her life." His defiance was fierce, but Poirot sensed a flicker of fear. Hawthorne's ambition was a motive, but not the key. Carlyle, his aristocratic calm unshaken, tapped his cane lightly. "This is absurd, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice smooth as brandy. "You chase phantoms while the truth escapes you." Poirot's eyes narrowed, recalling the water samples from the flute traced to Carlyle's estate well. "Monsieur, your cane. It could conceal a vial, no? And the payments from Elena? Blackmail to hide her sister's existence?" Carlyle's smile was cold. "Charity, not blackmail. You have no proof." His denial was polished, but Poirot noted the cessation of his cane's tapping, a sign of unease. The stage grew colder, the fog outside pressing closer, as if conspiring to shield the killer. Poirot paced, his cane tapping in rhythm with his thoughts. "The cyanide," he said, "was not in the flute alone, but in the sapphire ring Elena wore, its loose setting a vessel for poison, activated by the champagne's touch, a method most intimate, requiring knowledge of her habits and her trust." He held up the burned letter fragment. "Elena, forgive me. S. This letter," he continued, "is the killer's confession, disguised as remorse. The handwriting, altered to mislead, matches the note. Your final bow approaches. But who is S?" He turned to Sophia, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle Beaumont, your initial. And your secret. Sophia's face paled, her hands clutching her shawl. I wrote no letter, she cried. I loved Elena, despite her cruelty. But Poirot's gray cells had locked onto the truth, the pieces aligning like notes with cyanide from the prop room. You knew her habits, her sip of champagne before her aria. You planted the vial to frame Hawthorne, the will to distract Langford, the glove to mislead. The letter S for Sophia was your confession, burned to hide your guilt. The auditorium fell silent, the suspects frozen under the spotlight. Sophia's tears spilled over, her voice a broken sob. She had everything: fame, love, adoration. I wanted her spotlight, just once. I didn't mean for it to go so far. Her confession hung heavy, the truth unmasked at last. Japp stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting. Sophia Beaumont, you're under arrest for the murder of Elena Voss. She offered no resistance, her shoulders slumping as the constables led her away. Poirot turned to the others, his voice solemn. The red herrings, Carlyle's cane, Langford's fingerprints, Hawthorne's ring, were distractions, woven to obscure the truth. But the little gray cells, they see through the fog. He paused, letting the weight of the resolution settle. Ambition, mes amis, is a poison as deadly as cyanide. Carlyle, his face pale, spoke softly. I suspected her, but I couldn't believe it. Langford, shaken, muttered about the theater's salvation. Hawthorne, his defiance softened, nodded in grudging respect. The stage, once a scene of tragedy, now held the quiet of justice served. The chapter closed with Poirot standing alone, the fog outside swirling like a fading curtain. The locket, the letter, the ring, all had led to Sophia's betrayal. Her envy a fatal note in the opera's score. The truth, he whispered, is a star that shines even in the darkest night. The auditorium fell silent, the chandeliers tinkling the only sound, as the final act drew to its close. Chapter 10. Encore of Justice. The Starlit Opera House, its gilded halls now hushed in the aftermath of revelation, stood as a monument to the tragedy and triumph of Madame Elena Voss's final performance. The fog that had cloaked London for days began to lift, revealing a city bathed with quiet satisfaction. The little gray cells, mon ami, they see through the fog of misdirection. Mademoiselle Beaumont's envy was a poison more potent than cyanide, her betrayal a note that could not remain unsung. He turned to the auditorium as if addressing an invisible audience. The Opera House, it is a mirror of the human heart, glittering, yet full of shadows. The suspects, now cleared of guilt, lingered in the wings, their faces a mix of relief and sorrow. Reginald Hawthorne, his lean frame no longer taut with defiance, stood with arms crossed, his dark eyes softened by the resolution. Victor Langford, his florid face less flushed, mopped his brow with a handkerchief, the weight of his embezzlement confession still heavy but no longer damning. Lord Edmund Carlyle, his silver cane now a mere accessory, stood apart, his aristocratic poise tempered by a flicker of regret. Sophia Beaumont was gone, led away in handcuffs, her tearful confession echoing in the silence. She had everything. I wanted her spotlight, just once. Poirot's mind retraced the threads that had unraveled the mystery. The cyanide-laced champagne, delivered with fatal precision, had been Sophia's weapon, swapped during a heated argument in the costume loft. The locket, containing a photograph of Voss's sister, had revealed a secret that fueled Sophia's envy. Elena's sacrifices for her family, a nobility Sophia could not match.
The forged will. Langford's desperate bid to save his theater had pointed falsely to Hawthorne. The stained glove, the hidden passage, the jeweler's receipt for the sapphire ring, all were red herrings, carefully placed to obscure Sophia's guilt. The burned letter fragment, "Elena, forgive me, S," had been her final unwitting confession, its handwriting altered, but betraying her hand. Poirot addressed Jap, his voice measured. "The killer, Inspector, was not driven by greed or revenge alone, but by a wound to the soul. Mademoiselle Beaumont saw in Madame Voss all that she could not be, adored."
A gesture of atonement, perhaps, Carlyle had said, his voice low, acknowledging his own role in Voss's tangled life. His payments from her, once suspected as blackmail, were revealed as contributions to the orphanage where her sister resided, a secret kept to protect both their reputations. Hawthorne, his ambition no longer shadowed by Voss, was offered the lead in the next production, a chance to step into the spotlight he had craved. "I didn't want her dead," he admitted to Poirot, his voice soft. "But I'll honor her by singing better than she ever did." His defiance had softened into resolve, a fitting tribute to the prima donna's legacy. Poirot stepped to the center of the stage, the chandelier above casting prismatic light across his face. "The opera," he said, his voice rising, "is a drama of passion, of triumph and tragedy. Madame Voss's life was such a performance, her death a final act scripted by envy. But justice, mes amis, is the encore that restores harmony." Jap clapped him on the shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie. "You're a marvel, Poirot. I'll never understand how you do it. Those gray cells of yours must be working overtime." Poirot smiled, adjusting his tie. "They never rest, Inspector, when truth is at stake. The human heart, it is a complex score. But the little gray cells, they always find the melody." As the suspects dispersed, the opera house seemed to exhale, its grandeur restored by the clarity of resolution. Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the auditorium, its empty seats a testament to the drama's end. He thought of Voss, her voice a memory now, soaring through arias that had captivated London. Her sister, safe in the orphanage, would never know the full cost of her fame. But Poirot's work ensured her sacrifice was not in vain. He descended from the stage, his cane tapping softly against the polished boards. The locket, now in Jap's evidence bag, was a final reminder of Voss's humanity, a star who had burned brightly, yet carried the weight of a hidden